You're watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll have a look at what's been making the headlines with three top guests: The Observer's Sonia Sodha, The Mail on Sunday's Harry Cole, and the freelance political journalist Isabel Oakeshott. So let's have a look at what's on some of those front pages, shall we? The Eye leads with the news that Boris Johnson has now left intensive care, but that the recovery period means it's likely he won't be back at work for quite some time. The Telegraph describes the Prime Minister as being in extremely good spirits, and The Times says that he's at an early stage in his recovery. It's the same story on The Express. Their headline, Boris out of danger, and likewise The Sun. Boris is out, they say. Urging people to stay inside for the sake of overburdened NHS workers, the Mirror calls the Easter period a make-or-break weekend. The Mail is angry with the Community Secretary Robert Jenrick for allegedly flouting the lockdown. He says he was visiting his elderly parents to deliver them essential supplies and medicine. Nearly 1,000 people in care homes have died in care without their deaths being officially recorded as resulting from coronavirus. That's according to The Guardian. And The Star criticises the Chief Constable of Northamptonshire Police for saying the public could have their shopping trolleys searched, and has some harsh words for celebrities sharing COVID-19 conspiracy theories on social media. And we welcome Sonia, Harry and Isabel from the comfort of their homes this evening. Thanks to you all for the socially distanced pay-per-view. One story really, isn't there, on many of the front pages today, and that's the good news that Boris Johnson's now out of intensive care. Sonia, how are the papers covering it?
So, yes, as you say, it's the main story for a lot of the papers. Really good news for the whole country. So the Prime Minister's been in intensive care for 3 nights, in hospital for a total of 4 nights. We know that he was never put on a ventilator. He did receive oxygen support, but it wasn't that sort of more extreme step of being put on a ventilator for mechanically assisted breathing. So that was obviously kind of very positive news that's come out of government in the last few days. So it's a really positive story. A lot of the papers are focusing on, well, what does this mean in terms of implications for government? When might he be coming back to work? Obviously, we don't know that. And the key thing, I think, will be for the Prime Minister. There was some concern, I think, in government that he was pushing himself too hard, that he was working too hard, trying to keep on top of everything that was going on in government while he was kind of suffering from the virus. And we now know that his symptoms were getting more serious. So I hope, I'm sure everyone else will hope, that the Prime Minister will take the time off that he needs to recover before going back to government. He does have a sort of de facto deputy in place, Dominic Raab. He's been doing the press conferences. So I think it would send the right signal if the Prime Minister takes the time off that he needs to recover. But it's a huge relief. I think everyone was really shaken by the news that he'd been taken first into hospital and then into intensive care. So I think we can all breathe a sigh of relief now in time for the Easter weekend.
Yeah, as The Sun says, now that really is a Good Friday. Some good news there about Boris Johnson's health. Harry Cole, do you think it's made a difference to the government and the way that they've reacted to coronavirus, having the Prime Minister in intensive care?
Yeah, I do, and I think the whole country in a weird way. I don't think anyone will forget where they were on Monday night when they heard the news that Boris Johnson had gone into intensive care. It was a real sort of defining moment, I think, for this crisis. And I think it will probably have rammed home the realities of this to a lot of people who may not have been affected, may not have known anyone who's been caught up with this awful virus. But there was this horrible feeling of a nation actually kind of rudderless without really knowing where it was going. And on a personal level, obviously, it's fantastic news. And on a national level, it's fantastic news that he's going to pull through and he's going to make it. So it is an astonishing twist to this story that just keeps on, providing surreal moments. And I think if anything can ram home to people the seriousness of this virus and the fact that, they do have to obey these rules, is the fact that, the nation potentially could have lost its leader over it. And I think that's a really remarkable moment in our nation's history.
Yes, certainly a really sobering moment to hear that he'd gone into intensive care. Someone such an energetic kind of personality, a lot of kind of vibrancy about him, I guess, like him or loathe him. Isabel Oakeshott, how do you think the nation will react to the news that Boris Johnson's now been moved into a ward?
I think whatever your politics, that is a massive relief for people. As Harry said, it was such a moment when we found out that that is what happened. I thought it was bad enough and shocking enough when Prince Charles was revealed to have coronavirus, and he seems to have come through it very, very mildly, really. To have your Prime Minister being taken into intensive care, whatever you think of the Conservative administration, is an incredibly sobering thing. So I think there will be a lot of relief. I think that it's going to be very challenging for Boris Johnson to actually give himself the space to make the recovery that he will need to make. It's hard to imagine how difficult it must be lying in a hospital bed thinking, I'm the Prime Minister and I'm not able to do the job that I have been elected to do. And it will be very, very tempting for him to come back much too soon. And he's going to have to resist that temptation. I'm not terribly optimistic that he will.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see whether he does feel under pressure to come back slightly too early, as Sonia was mentioning as well. The Sun, of course, has a headline, Boris is out. They got that picture of him clapping there ahead of applauding the NHS workers. That was the last time we saw him in public. And the Daily Telegraph as well, on their front page, the headline there, Johnson out of ICU as health improves, picking up on the fact that he's said to be in extremely good spirits. Shall we have a quick look at another story on one of the front pages? This is The Times. They are talking about a potential overreach, shall we say, of the police. Patel slaps down the police over call for more powers. Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, warning the police against being heavy-handed over the sunny Easter weekend. It's a difficult balancing act, isn't it, Sonia Sodha, with the police, knowing how to police these new rules?
It is a difficult balancing act, but I think most people will have watched the Chief Constable of Northamptonshire Police give his press conference and thought that was just way too heavy-handed. He sort of said in his press conference, the police aren't setting up roadblocks yet. We're not going through your trolley yet, but that may change. When he said going through your trolley, he meant to sort of see if you're buying essential goods or not, whether, you might be stocking up on Easter eggs for the Easter weekend. And I think it was a massive overreach. There's nothing in the law that says that when you're going out to shop for essentials, you can't buy the odd treat as well, and who would even define what a treat is? So, I think he's had a very strong rebuke from Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, but also from government spokespeople. And I think there will be quite a lot of anger actually in government, because it's just not a great look. And when you're sort of imploring the public to abide by the rules in good faith, obviously sometimes they do need to be policed. And the fact that I think Greater Manchester Police said they had to break up quite a few house parties in the hundreds last weekend, and that is really something that the police should be sort of policing the rules on. We should not be having house parties that bring lots of people from different households together. That is not playing by the rules and playing by the law. But when it comes to something like going and doing a supermarket shop, what you put in your trolley should really be up to you. So I think there will be some anger in Number 10 tonight that the police have overreached in this way.
Yeah, I have to say I was quite shocked when I was listening to the audio of one of the people calling in the house party in Greater Manchester with 30 to 40 people having a party there. Harry Cole, do you think the police have got it right so far?
Broadly, yes, but I think Sonia and I discussed this last week, actually. There's just this sneaking feeling you get that some of the police are just enjoying this a little bit too much. And this is where Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, has come out tonight and said, actually, no, you've got enough powers. Don't even think about asking for more yet. You've got more than enough scope to deal with this lockdown. And the problem with the lockdown is that, policing in Britain as a tradition is policing by consent. The easiest way to keep this lockdown going is if you keep the police and the public broadly agreeing and on side. And I think little things like this Northamptonshire Constable, Chief Constable, who's rarely out of the news, to be honest. He's, if you Google him, he appears with a bungling in front of his name more often than not. And just saying stupid things like that. And then, rather than admitting and putting his hands up that he'd messed up today, the Northamptonshire Police put out this tweet that said, oh, contrary to some media reports, we won't be doing that. They couldn't even say, we're sorry, we misjudged this, I got it wrong. They attempted to blame the media, us, for reporting what the gentleman said. And you just think, we really need to keep this fine balance between consent and public order. And it doesn't help when some of the most senior police chiefs in the country are going around, saying they're going to rifle through your Jaffa cakes.
And Isabel Oakeshott, I can see you nodding along to some of that there. Are you in agreement?
Yes, I mean, look, I'm struck by the overwhelming scale of support for these measures. If you look at recent polling this week, it shows sort of something like well into the 90s percentage-wise of people support the lockdown, support the restrictions that have been put on our lives. And for many people, most of us, but for some more than others, it's incredibly difficult abiding by these rules. The last thing we need is some busybody senior policeman suggesting that he has a right to tell us what should or shouldn't be in our shopping trolleys. And as Harry said, that's the point where you lose people. The government have got to bring people along with them. They're doing very well with that. All the evidence is that people are supportive. There isn't a huge clamour to ease the restrictions next week. But when you have sort of overbearing policing like this, it risks losing the argument. And I'm surprised that this far in, we're 3 weeks into this nearly, the government is still having to slap down the police for this sort of thing. I mean, they've already been told that having drones overhead was not appropriate. There have been multiple examples of police overreaching themselves, and yet they are still doing it. And I think the other thing that I'm slightly concerned about is us turning into a nation of snoopers. I don't like this habit that people are developing of ringing into the police, of having spied their neighbours doing something they disapprove of. I think that is a really disturbing route to go down. It's not in keeping with the British liberal culture. And I really hope that we don't see more of that as time goes on. It shouldn't be encouraged.
Interesting stuff. Thank you to the three of you for the first half of the paper review. Lots more coming up from all of you in just a few moments' time, including a cabinet minister who's been accused of flouting the lockdown. We'll bring you his response and that of our panel next. Welcome back. You're watching the press preview. With us now are Sonia Sodha, Harry Cole and Isabel Oakeshott, going through some of the front pages for tomorrow. The Daily Telegraph has got a story that some of the other papers are splashing on as well about the Cabinet Minister Robert Jenrick. Their headline is "Minister drives 40 miles to visit his parents." Worth pointing out that he has since tweeted to say, "For clarity, my parents asked me to deliver some essentials, including medicines. They're both self-isolating due to age and my father's medical condition, and I respected social distancing rules." So that story there about Robert Jenrick, the Community Secretary, who's been urging people to stay indoors. Let's get the view of our panel, shall we, on this. I think it might be a controversial one. Sonia Sodha, what do you think? Is Robert Jenrick in the right here?
Well, I think if he was literally just dropping food and medicine off at his parents' house, if he wasn't sort of coming into contact with them, if he just sort of dropped it off outside and stayed, sort of didn't go into the house, I think it is quite tricky to sort of criticise him, because under government rules, you are allowed to sort of drop off food and medicine for the elderly. Now, obviously, it totally isn't ideal to be travelling really long distances to do that. And if there are people living locally who could do that for your parents, that's probably better. But I mean, he lives 40 miles from his parents. So I don't know. I personally, I think if he didn't come into contact with them, we don't know the full story. Perhaps there wasn't anyone else who could get the medicine. I don't really have a problem with it.
I mean, it's on the front page of a few papers, isn't it? The Daily Telegraph, but it's also the front page on the Mail. It's on the Guardian as well. Harry Cole, what's your take on this story?
Well, it's a bit of a funny one, I think, because obviously last weekend the Scottish Sun had an absolute corker of a story, open and shut case. The Scottish medical officer who was photographed at her country home and then later admitted she'd done it 2 weeks in a row. And she came out and said, absolutely no excuse, I'm banged to rights. And ultimately she lost her job. No questions asked. It was an obvious case of hypocrisy. Now, however, with Robert Jenrick, it's a much more grey area here. Now, this story broke earlier on the Guardian website, and it immediately didn't survive contact, shall we say, with Twitter, because everyone was saying, but in your third part of your story, you've got his statement, or a source close to him, saying that he was dropping off medicines. Now, interestingly, the only slight sort of thing that did not ring true for me was the fact that Robert Jenrick was told about the story running before it was in the paper by The Guardian, and it was just a source close to him. He didn't go on the record. He didn't say what he subsequently said on Twitter, that he was dropping off medicine. He left a layer between them, a bit of wriggle room. Maybe he thought The Guardian might have pictures. They obviously didn't, because they would have run them by now if they had. So there's a little bit of wriggle room there.
Okay.
But, if he really was dropping off medicine, then this story seems to be a bit of a damp squib.
I'm going to just get a very quick thought from Isabel Oakeshott, because we are running out of time. You were moaning about snoopers earlier. Is this potential snoopers here?
Yeah, I mean, look, rule makers can't be rule breakers, and hypocrisy is a problem. But I'm really uncomfortable with judging Robert Jenrick for visiting his elderly parents. And even if he sat down and talked to them through a window, I think that people have to make their own judgments.
I'm going to have to cut you off there. Thank you all for a lively paper review. Good to speak to you all this evening. Much appreciated. Lots more coming up on Sky News in just a few moments' time. That was the press preview on Sky News at 10.